We now welcome on in Matt Newton of CavaliersNow, a big Virginia fan, as we can see based on that wall behind you. Matt, how's it going today? Thanks so much for coming on.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, we've got a very interesting game to sort of break down coming up this weekend between the Orange and the Cavaliers. And let's talk UVA. I mean, before we do too much of kind of a deep dive as far as some of the wins, some of the losses this team has gone through this year. You get all five starters back from a year ago for Tony Bennett's squad. Now, granted, that team only made it to the NIT tournament. So I guess my question is, is returning everybody for a squad that only went to the NIT last year, like, is that a good thing, or is it a result of just not having enough talent and not doing enough to address it in the offseason? What's sort of different about this year's team that has fans hoping for a different result than last year?
Well, I think if you had asked UVA fans last offseason what the biggest question was, it would be just that. Is it a good thing to bring back so many players from a team that underperformed, right? But I think an important thing to remember is if you look at Tony Bennett's tenure at Virginia, his best teams have been his most experienced teams. The longer that he gets guys in his system, especially on the defensive end, the better those guys are on the defensive end, which is obviously how Virginia wins. And so, yes, that team was not the best last year, but bringing back the same guys, there is an expected leap that's going to take place with the exact same team. So your starting five is the same. They brought back their top six scorers from last year, but they did add a few key additions to the roster. So first you get Ben Vanderplas, a graduate transfer from Ohio, and he's played a lot of basketball. Virginia had a lot of experience playing against him because he led his Ohio team to an upset over number 4 Virginia in the first round of the 2021 NCAA tournament. So they were very familiar with what he can do. And I can get into the specifics later of what he specifically has meant for the X's and O's of the team. But already there, you have a little bit more depth. And then they brought in a very highly touted recruiting class that's 4 freshmen. And although freshmen don't usually play a whole lot of UVA, we do have 2, Ryan Dunn and Isaac McNeely, who have found some meaningful minutes early in their careers. So I'd say you bring back the same 6 guys, the top 6 that were there last year, the experience, that's very good. Tony Bennett can do a lot with that, especially on the defensive end, but then you also bring in the newcomers and you just have a depth with Virginia that you didn't have last season.
You look at the season summary up to this point, big wins over Baylor, Illinois, Michigan, but then a couple of losses to a Miami team that's at the top of the ACC right now, to Houston, who is ranked number 1 for a good chunk of the non-conference. What really has been the synopsis of this season from a results standpoint on the court for Virginia?
Well, I think you're kind of seeing with Virginia a microcosm of the entire college basketball season right now overall, which is who can really say who's really good right now? I mean, Houston's probably going to be number 1 again next week because Purdue just lost. And I mean, can we really say definitively what's the best team in the nation right now? It seems like teams rise and then they fall. It's pretty tough to figure out right now. I know nobody in the ACC thought we'd be looking at Pitt and Clemson battling it out for first place in the ACC heading into the new year, but that's where we are. And Virginia is kind of the same way. Virginia started off very hot, maybe a lot hotter than even the most optimistic UVA fans were expecting. I think if you told UVA fans that Virginia was going to go into Vegas and pick up back-to-back ranked wins against Baylor and Illinois, erase an 11-point halftime deficit at Michigan and then lose a close one to Houston. You go through those 4 games and you come out 3-1. I think UVA fans definitely would have taken that. So you kind of start with the highest of highs right off the bat. And you just know the college basketball season is long. It's 30 games. It's 4 months. It's not going to last, right? No team is going to win every single game. That's why that hasn't happened in 40 something years. So you kind of knew that they were going to cool off eventually. And the way you've seen that is in their 3-point shooting. It's in their free throw shooting and a couple of breakdowns on the defensive end. But Virginia has definitely cooled off. Now they're 2-3 in their last 5 games. And I'd say the ceiling is still there. You can still see this team return to what they were doing early in the season. But I think it's just growing pains. You got some newcomers coming into the mix. They're still trying to figure out what the optimal lineup is. I think if you asked me, and I'm sure you would, what the biggest issue with Virginia right now is, we can't really point to the lineup that works best. It's kind of just you have 8 or 9 guys in the team who could play the closing 5 minutes of any given game, but not the same 5 guys are going to have the hot hand in every game. And so that is something that Tony Bennett and the UVA coaching staff has struggled with, I think, through the first 2 months of the season, is figuring out what's the best lineup to go with for each individual situation. And I think with a game against Syracuse where you kind of throw out the playbook because it's going to be unique, right? You're playing against the 2-3 zone. You're playing against that classic Syracuse defense. It's going to be different. And so I think that's something that Tony Bennett and the coaching staff will continue to work on, try to figure out, what the optimal lineups are. And obviously Tony Bennett would tell you that the defense continues to be the biggest issue, even though, they're still 20th, I think, in adjusted defensive efficiency.
In the context of that loss specifically to Pitt back on Tuesday, UVA leading by as many as 13 in the first half. They let Pitt go on a 14-0 run in the second half after leading by 10 at the break. For a team that does play such sound defense and prioritizes taking care of the basketball and not turning it over and not giving up leads like that they possess, what specifically in that Pitt game really went wrong that where things took a turn for the worse?
I think it was Pitt's aggressiveness on the offensive end. Virginia's guard play is usually pretty good at denying penetration into the lane, and Pitt was having their way with UVA on defense, which is something you don't see a whole lot. Their guards were frequently getting into the paint. That was leading to easy baskets at the rim for their big guy and some wide open 3-pointers for their shooters. And you don't see that a whole lot. But Pitt was taking it to the paint. They were just relentless. And that's something that Virginia wasn't doing. So Virginia went to the free throw line 4 times in that game. They made all 4 shots, but what good is a 100% free throw rate if you're only at the line 4 times? Pitt went to the line 17 times. And that isn't, even the UVA fans, wouldn't say that was because the refs were calling the game terribly or something. It was because Virginia was settling for mid-range shots, for perimeter shots, low percentage shots in that second half, as opposed to driving to the basket. If you look at some of UVA's early season success, through the first 4 or 5 games of the season, UVA was among the nation's leaders in free throw rate and free throw percentage. They were getting to the line the most of any team in the country and converting on those attempts. Now you've seen both of those percentages decline a lot over the last several games, and it kind of came to a head in the Pitt game. And like I said, they made all 4 of their free throw attempts, but they just weren't attacking the rim like they needed to. Defensively, UVA fans were a little bit upset with some of the lineup decisions, and obviously you have your couch coaches everywhere in every fan base, but Caden Shedrick, the team's starting center, was out of the game for a stretch of minutes there in the second half, and it wasn't foul trouble, it wasn't injury that we know of, but we kept Ben Vanderplas, who's 6'8", at the center position. And what you see there is, okay, it's a little bit more of a versatile lineup because they can switch more, but Ben Vanderplas is not a rim protector. So when Pitt's guards were penetrating, getting inside, getting to the rim, they didn't have the eraser at the rim that Caden Shedrick can be when he's at his best. And so that's how you were getting a lot of those easy dump offs for layups, wide open corner threes from the Pitt guards penetrating the zone. But Tony Bennett would tell you after the game that his team just needed to be tougher. They needed to be better staying in front, denying those dribble drives into the zone. And I don't know if that's as much of an issue as just effort, or if there's something in the tape that he can look to and say, here's what it was. But it was just very uncharacteristic for a Virginia defense to be playing so poorly on that end of the floor.
You mentioned Tony Bennett. Obviously, you have the lows of 2018 to the highs that are 2019, as we can see behind you. And then 2021, you mentioned that upset again. Last year, Johnny was talking about it's the NIT. How has Tony Bennett evolved over the last, 5 years or so with everything that's gone on with the Virginia program to what he's built here in 2023?
I think to answer that question, you have to start first on the recruiting trail. I think COVID was a disruptive factor there. I think a lot of UVA fans were hoping that the national championship would cause this boon of recruiting. And to some extent, you did see that for one recruiting class. I think it was the 2020 recruiting class, was a pretty good one. But then with the advent of the transfer portal, they saw a couple of those guys leave because in Tony Bennett's system, you don't come in expecting to start every single game as a freshman. You kind of have to earn your way. If your defense isn't where it needs to be, you're not going to play. And so a couple of those guys ended up hitting the transfer portal. couple of them going to ACC schools. You see Justin McCoy at North Carolina. You see Casey Morsell going to NC State, and they've done fairly well. Casey Morsell in particular. But what followed that was a couple of, I don't want to call them dud recruiting classes, but recruiting classes that didn't really pan out. Their 2021 recruiting class in particular didn't really produce a whole lot, if I'm remembering the years correctly. Now what you're seeing is Tony Bennett's resurgence kind of on the recruiting trail. He kind of made up for the lapses in recruiting through the transfer portal. He got Jaden Gardner and Armand Franklin out of the transfer portal for last season, and those two guys ended up being the team's leading scorers last season. So he kind of made up for it there, but now you're seeing the resurgence on the recruiting trail. This year you bring in four-star recruits, one of the highest rated recruiting classes of the Tony Bennett era, and now he's bringing in 2 more 4-stars for next season, plus a mid-season transfer. We're getting Dante Harris from Georgetown, and so they're excited about that because that's an answer at the point guard position. So that's just a comment on recruiting, because obviously it begins with the talent. Tony Bennett does a lot with development as well, so that's important to remember. But obviously in college basketball, it all starts with recruiting. I would say that overall, Tony Bennett has gotten to the point where, as I said before, experience is really important when it comes to getting his teams to play defense the way that he expects. And so that's why I think the defense is much improved this year overall. Right now, he would tell you that his defense isn't playing well enough at all. But overall, the defense is playing better this year as compared to last. On the offensive end, that's where I feel Tony Bennett has evolved the most, not just in the last 5 years, but throughout his career. Over the course of any given season, he does a very good job of, obviously in conjunction with his assistants, figuring out what kind of offense best fits this crop of personnel. So earlier in his career, you could kind of see they had the same offensive set and they ran it every single possession, no matter what. Nowadays, they're kind of fluctuating between different offensive sets depending on what the talent is. And so this year, you've seen a little bit more on-ball screens because you have ball handlers and shooters. Last year, where they just didn't have any shooters, they couldn't really take advantage of it. So I think this team is still finding its stride, and that's a season-long process. Tony Bennett will definitely give you a couple of pearls of wisdom every time in every press conference that every season is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a race to improve, but Tony Bennett's teams tend to get better as you go on towards the end of the season. So it was kind of unusual that they played so well early in the season, and now they're kind of experiencing that lull. They just got to come out of it, and I think they will.
Kihei Clark, obviously the leader of this team, still around from that national championship squad a few years back. It's a typical supporting cast of characters, though, for UVA. No one really jumping off the page too much as far as the offensive output is concerned. You've got Beekman, the sharpshooter, Gardner, who plays some bully ball, Franklin, who you alluded to earlier, does a little bit of everything, and then, of course, Shedrick, the rim protector. Which of those 4, if we're talking about the starting 5 outside of Kihei Clark, is the most important for this team to have success come February, come March, and why would you say that's the way it is?
100%, it's got to be Reese Beekman. And you could even make an argument that Reese Beekman is more important to this team than Kihei Clark. No disrespect to what Clark has accomplished throughout his career, but the best player on the team is Reese Beekman. He's starting to pop up on some NBA mock drafts here and there. He's played a lot of basketball already. He's only in his 3rd year at UVA, but he was starting, I think, 20 or 25 games as a freshman, which is very unusual. And that was because of his defense. He's considered one of the best on-ball defenders, not just in the ACC, but in the entire country. He was 2nd in the ACC Defensive Player of the Year voting last year. I think he's got a good shot to win it this year. But this season, he's really taken strides on the offensive end of the floor. He had a little bit of trouble with not hunting his shot. He's a very athletic player. He's got a good handle on the ball. He can drive to the basket with success. He just wasn't doing it enough. He also wasn't shooting the 3 very much earlier in his career, and he wasn't shooting at a very high clip. He's shooting the 3 more. He's shooting it at the highest rate of his career. He's driving the basketball more. He's doing so with success. The problem is he has had injury troubles for the last 5 or 6 games. So burst that he so relies on in his offensive game. It kind of seems like it was as a result of the ankle injury, but we're not sure of this. But now he has a hamstring strain. So over the last few weeks or so, he's been dealing with a hamstring strain. They totally sat him out of the Albany game, a game that they felt that they could win without him. He played through the Houston and Miami games with the hamstring strain, and you could just tell he's not 100%. He's not attacking the rim, and he's a very important part of the UVA offense. When he's attacking the paint, that's when UVA is at its best, because teams are forced to help over on him. He's just that athletic, and he's got the vision and the passing skills to be able to exploit the defense when that happens. So his condition has been a very important factor, and I think he's slowly approaching 100% again. I thought he looked pretty good in the game at Pitt. I think he's still trying to work back into being aggressive, because I think he just has to get that feel for the game again. But as he returns to 100%, gets back to being, aggressive as he needs to be, then Virginia could maybe rediscover some of that early season magic. But 100%, Reese Beekman is the most important player on this team.
You mentioned his defense. Syracuse's offense has been very one-dimensional of late. It's if the guards, Joe Girard and Judah Mintz, are not scoring, then this team is not going to score many points. And you'd have to imagine Beekman will be defending one of those two players, if not both, at times during Saturday's game. So how do you see Virginia's defense gearing up to stop Syracuse's guard-heavy attack for two guys that are both averaging over 15 points a game?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it right. This game will be won and lost at the guard position. Whoever wins that matchup will probably win the game. I mean, obviously there's more factors to be considered, but the guard matchups there are going to be really, really important. I think Kihei Clark has been a very good defender throughout his career. Kind of that pesky little guy that pick you up 94 feet and really annoy you. He does give up a little bit, obviously, in size. So Syracuse has bigger guards. They can get a switch on him. That's the only part where it's not even because he's not playing good defense. It's just he doesn't stand a chance when they back him down and they can elevate for a jumper over him. But overall, obviously, he's a very good defender. Reese Beekman, obviously, speaks for himself. First team all ACC and in defense last year. So he's very good. Armaan Franklin, that's your third guard that will come into play here. His defense this year has been very, very good. Last year, I think it took him a little while to get kind of accustomed to the pack line defense, but he's been playing really good defense of late too. So that's three guards there capable of playing very good on-ball defense. But as I said, with the Pitt game, I don't think any of those three guys played their best defensive game against Pitt. And so I think they're going to take that personally. They're going to attack, preparation for the Syracuse game, with an extra edge. And they're going to be very motivated to not see what happened in the Pitt game develop into a trend. And so you might see those guys, playing very aggressively, playing with a lot of energy. Maybe you get them into a little bit of foul trouble early on because they're playing too aggressive. But yeah, I mean, Syracuse's guards are going to have to come to play because Virginia isn't coming off of some big win. They're coming off of a loss, kind of a humbling loss where their defense was what lost them the game. And so I think specifically at the guard position, those guys are going to be playing with a little bit of their pride on the line.
All right, well, there's the formula for how each team earns the victory this weekend. Matt, got to ask, though, I don't know if you've made any, official predictions or whatnot as far as Saturday is concerned, but perhaps we can trouble you to look into your crystal ball a little bit here and see how, you think this one is going to shape up.
Haven't made an official prediction yet, but yeah, I'll come up with one for you. So it's Virginia-Syracuse games are difficult, because you can very easily see how this game could end up being in the 40s, depending on how each team shoots. So Syracuse's zone is going to force Virginia into taking a lot of three-pointers. And that has been a roller coaster for Virginia this season. They started off shooting the lights out. They were north of 50% through their first three games. Since then, it's kind of, teetered off. They went, I think, 6 or 7 games in a row where they didn't hit more than 6 three-pointers in a game. Last couple of games have been a little better. They've shot better than 40% in those games. So it's kind of which Virginia team is going to show up. Georgia Tech threw some zone at them a couple weeks ago, or I think that was a week ago. And Virginia had one of its best three-point shooting games of the season. They shot 45% from three in that game. They hit 10 three-pointers. So my point there is if Virginia is shooting the ball well, then you could see kind of that higher scoring game. We have seen some of those before if Virginia's 3-point shot is on. I think that'll be your biggest factor. And then obviously if Syracuse can keep pace, it'll be up to the guard play there. I'd say, given the fact that Virginia is coming off of that disappointing loss at Pitt, I'd say given the fact that Tony Bennett is going to be gunning for the all-time wins record at UVA on Saturday, that's something that his team really wants to give him, even though he'd tell you that something like that doesn't really matter to him. His team wants to give that to him, especially at home. I'd say that gives the edge to Virginia. I wouldn't be surprised if this game came down to the last couple of possessions, but I'd probably give Virginia by 3 or 4 points, let's say 70-66.
That feels about right to me. Just a couple of quick hitters here before we let you go, Matt. How much longer is Kihei Clark allowed to play for Virginia? It feels like he's been there the entirety of my, adult life. It feels like he's been there forever.
Well, I wouldn't put it past the NCAA to pass some special regulation allowing Kihei to come back for another year. But
is this year 5 or year 6 here?
This is year 5.
Okay.
So this is his 5th season, but he's been playing all 5 seasons. There wasn't a red shirt, but he did play, I believe, in every single game as a true freshman, and that was the national championship year. So that's why everyone in the ACC is thinking this guy's been here for a decade. Nope, just 5 years, but it's been a long 5 years, that's for sure.
And the second thing before we let you go is I have to bring it up. Where were you during the 2016 Elite Eight game when Syracuse came back to beat Virginia?
Well, I was watching that at home. I believe it was Easter Sunday.
Yep.
I'm from Pennsylvania, and I was watching it at home in Pennsylvania. And I had a bunch of my friends text me at halftime of that game, congratulating Virginia on going to the Final Four. And I wanted to throw my phone across the room because I had never experienced a Final Four for Virginia in my life to that point. So I knew it doesn't matter that Virginia's up 15, 16 points, whatever it was. There's a long half still to be played. And sure enough, Malachi Richardson, is that correct?
That's correct.
Ripped my heart out. And honestly, Virginia fans will tell you this, and this has been polled frequently over the years. The loss to UMBC is not the most painful loss in the history of UVA basketball. It is that Elite Eight loss to Syracuse in 2016. Because that team, I'm sure you guys remember, that was a beloved team. That was Malcolm Brogdon and London Parentes and Anthony Gill. Those guys were the ones who built this program to what it is now. And they were seniors. I think London Parentes maybe was a junior, but a lot of that class left after that year. That was their last chance, and they were right there. I think it was a 14-point game with 8 minutes to go. They had it, it was in the bag. So UVA fans would tell you, that is the most painful loss in the history of UVA basketball. And I, for one, that game always comes to mind when Virginia and Syracuse go head to head. They definitely have had their fair share of great games over the years, but that one's probably the most notable.
Well, we'll find out Saturday if we've got another classic installment in the works from Charlottesville. That's Matt Newton of Cavaliers Now, helping us preview Syracuse and UVA coming up this weekend. Matt, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.